When I first met Emily, I thought I had hit the jackpot. We were in our mid-20s, madly in love, and ready to take on the world together. A few years later, we had 3 kids, a beautiful family that everyone envied. I worked hard, building my business from the ground up, providing for us so that Emily could stay home with the kids. It wasn't easy, but I never complained. I loved my family more than anything, and everything I did was for them. But as the years passed, something changed. At first, I chalked it up to the usual strains of marriage, busy schedules, sleepless nights with the kids, and the general chaos of life. Emily became distant, often distracted, and I found myself making excuses for her behavior. She's stressed, I told myself. She just needs a break. Then about a year ago, I started noticing strange things. Emily was constantly on her phone, texting late into the night with a smile on her face that I hadn't seen in years. She'd go out more often, saying she needed me time, which I didn't argue with. She deserved a break, but the nagging feeling in my gut wouldn't go away. Something wasn't right. One evening, I was putting the kids to bed when Emily's phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. She was in the shower, so I glanced at the screen out of habit. That's when I saw a message pop up from a contact saved under a generic name, Sarah. But the message wasn't something you'd send to a friend. It read, "Can't stop thinking about last night. When can we meet again?" My heart pounded in my chest. It felt like the floor had fallen out from under me. I stood there, frozen, the realization slowly sinking in. She was cheating on me. The woman I had built a life with, the mother of my children, was having an affair. I didn't confront her right away. Instead, I kept my suspicions to myself and started paying more attention. Over the next few weeks, I confirmed what I already knew. There were late-night phone calls, secretive texts, and a growing emotional distance that I couldn't ignore. I even followed her once and saw her meet a man outside a coffee shop, laughing, touching his arm in that flirtatious way she used to with me. I was devastated, angry, humiliated, but I knew I had to play it smart. We had 3 kids together, and if I confronted her in a fit of rage, it would only make things worse for them. So I made a decision. I was going to get a divorce. I didn't want to raise my kids in a household built on lies and betrayal. I deserved better, and so did they. But I wasn't stupid. I knew Emily well enough to know she wouldn't go quietly. She had always been good at playing the victim, and if this turned into a messy divorce, she'd come after me for everything I had worked for, everything I had built for our family. I needed a plan, and I needed it fast. The day I confronted her was calculated. I had all the evidence, texts, photos, everything I needed to prove the affair. I sat her down one evening after the kids were in bed, and I laid it all out in front of her. At first, she denied it. She acted shocked, insulted that I would even suggest such a thing. But when I showed her the proof, her face turned white. She knew she was caught. "I want a divorce," I said calmly, though inside I was seething. "And I'm going to make sure this goes as smoothly as possible, for the kids." Emily sat there in stunned silence for a moment before the tears came. She begged for forgiveness, swore it had been a mistake, that she would end it, and we could move on. But I wasn't interested in her apologies. The damage was done, and there was no going back. What happened next, though, was something I didn't fully anticipate. Emily's tears dried quickly, and her desperation turned into something else. Cold calculation. "If you think you're getting out of this with your money intact," she said, her voice icy, "you're wrong. I've spent years raising these kids while you built your little empire. I'm entitled to half of everything, and I'll take you for everything you've got if you try to leave me." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I knew divorces could be brutal, but hearing her so openly declare war on me, knowing she'd use our children as leverage, it was a new level of low, even for her. But what Emily didn't know was that I had already started thinking ahead. If she was going to play dirty, then so would I. Emily's words echoed in my head long after the confrontation. I hadn't expected her to crumble at my feet and beg for mercy, but the venom in her voice, the cold, calculating way she immediately shifted to threatening me, was worse than I had imagined. She wasn't just fighting to protect herself. She was coming for everything I had. For the next few weeks, things between us were tense but eerily calm. She acted as though nothing had changed in front of the kids, playing the part of the perfect wife and mother. But behind closed doors, it was a different story. We barely spoke, only communicating when absolutely necessary. It was like living with a stranger, and I couldn't help but feel the weight of betrayal every time I looked at her. I hired a lawyer, a smart one, and started preparing for what was bound to be a messy divorce. My lawyer, Jeff, had seen this kind of thing before. He wasn't surprised when I told him Emily's threat about going after everything I had. "It happens all the time," he said. But you've got a business, assets, and kids to think about. We need to play this smart. I nodded, grateful that someone knew what they were doing, because I certainly didn't. She's already coming for me, I muttered. How do I protect myself? We'll get to that, Jeff said, leaning back in his chair. But first, we need to know exactly what we're up against. She's going to ask for alimony, child support, and probably half of everything you've got. So we need to figure out where we can limit the damage. For the next few weeks, I focused on getting everything in order: bank accounts, property, investments. I didn't hide anything, but I made sure that what I could protect, I did. I trusted Jeff, and he reassured me that we were making progress. But no matter how much preparation we did, I knew Emily wouldn't back down. She had her own lawyer, and she had no intention of going easy on me. Things escalated quickly. Emily moved out of the house, thankfully, taking the kids with her to her parents' place, which meant I barely saw them. That hurt more than anything. She knew it would. I'd always been a hands-on dad, spending as much time with the kids as possible, despite my long hours building the business. It killed me that they were caught in the middle of this. Soon, the divorce proceedings began. Emily's lawyer came after me like a shark in the water, filing motions for full custody, outrageous alimony, and a significant chunk of my business's value. She claimed she had been financially disadvantaged by staying home with the kids while I built my career. Sure, she had been home with them, but I had funded everything. Every vacation, every dance class, every birthday party had been covered by me. Still, it didn't matter. The law wasn't exactly on my side, and Emily knew it. When we went to mediation, it was clear what her strategy was. She wanted to bleed me dry. Her demands were outrageous. She wanted the house, full custody of the kids, and half of my business, which I had built from scratch without a single contribution from her. I sat across from her in that room, watching her calmly demand all of this like it was her right, while I felt my life unraveling piece by piece. This is absurd, I finally said, my voice tight with frustration. You're asking for everything, Emily. This isn't a negotiation, it's a robbery. Emily didn't even flinch. She just stared at me, a cold smile playing on her lips. I'm entitled to what's fair, she said simply, as if I hadn't been the one carrying the weight of the family's finances for years. And if you think I'm backing down, you're wrong. I looked at my lawyer, who subtly shook his head, signaling that we weren't going to win this round. For now, we had to wait. But my blood boiled. Emily wasn't just trying to get what she thought she deserved. She wanted to punish me, to strip me of everything I had worked for. By the time the mediation ended, I felt like I had been gutted. The reality of it all hit me hard. She was going to win, or at least win enough to leave me with next to nothing. I walked out of that room with my head spinning, feeling like I was trapped in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. But as I drove home, something clicked. I wasn't going to let her walk away with everything. No, if she wanted to play dirty, then it was time for me to fight back, not just defensively, but aggressively. I wasn't just going to protect myself, I was going to take back control. That night, I sat in my office and thought about every angle. Emily thought she had me pinned, but there was one thing she didn't know about me. I was always good at finding loopholes, at turning a situation around when it seemed like there was no way out. I came up with a plan, one that would hit her where she least expected it. It was risky, and it would take time, but if I could pull it off, I wouldn't just protect myself. I'd get back everything she was trying to take from me. I called Jeff the next morning, laying out my idea. At first, he was skeptical, but the more we talked, the more he saw the potential. I have to admit, Jeff said, a grin spreading across his face, this might just work. I knew it would. I had no other choice. The plan wasn't just about getting back at Emily. It was about survival. If I let her take everything, I'd be left with nothing, barely able to provide for myself, let alone my kids. But I knew that if I played my cards right, I could turn this situation in my favor. First, I had to play along. Emily thought she had me cornered, so I needed her to feel comfortable, to think that she had already won. I knew her well enough to understand that she thrived on control. If she thought I was just rolling over, letting her take whatever she wanted, she wouldn't see the real plan coming. Over the next few weeks, I let things play out in court. Emily and her lawyer kept pushing for more alimony, more assets, more custody time with the kids. Every demand she made felt like another punch to the gut, but I kept my cool, kept my head down, and pretended like I was resigned to my fate. I agreed to mediation meetings, nodded my head during court hearings, and gave her as little resistance as possible. But behind the scenes, I was working with Jeff to put my plan in motion. The first step was setting up a new business, a separate entity that wasn't tied to the company I had spent years building. I worked quietly, funneling small amounts of money into this new venture, while making it look like my original business was struggling. Emily's lawyer had already subpoenaed my financial records, so we had to make it appear like I was barely keeping the lights on. My plan was to let her believe she had bled the original business dry, while the new one thrived under the radar. Next comma, I started moving some of my liquid assets, investments, savings, into accounts that would be harder for Emily to track or claim. Jeff helped me set up a trust in my parents' name, which held the bulk of my remaining funds. Legally, it would be difficult for her to touch that money. I also started spending more time with the kids, documenting every visit, every time I picked them up from her parents' house, knowing that a strong relationship with them could help in the custody battle down the line. The key to the plan, though, was in Emily herself. I knew her greed would be her downfall. Once she thought I was out of money, she'd push harder for the house, the one asset she really wanted. It was a beautiful home, in a great neighborhood, and I knew she saw it as a trophy. If I let her think the house was all that was left, she'd fight tooth and nail for it. And I was prepared to let her have it, temporarily. As the divorce dragged on, Emily's demands became more outrageous, and the court seemed to favor her. After all, she had been the stay-at-home mother, the primary caregiver, while I had been focused on work. The judge seemed sympathetic to her story, even though I knew the truth. She was good at playing the victim. Finally, the day came when Emily and her lawyer presented their final settlement offer. It was brutal. She wanted the house, full custody of the kids, and enough alimony to ensure I'd be paying her for the next decade. My lawyer, Jeff, glanced at me during the hearing, his expression tight. We both knew this was it. The judge looked over the offer and asked if I wanted to contest it. For a moment, I hesitated. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to fight back, to stand up and refuse her demands. But I knew better. This was the moment I had been waiting for. No, Your Honor, I said, my voice calm. I accept the terms. Emily's face lit up with triumph. She thought she had won. The house went to her. The settlement terms were locked in, and Emily walked out of that courtroom thinking she had stripped me of everything. But what she didn't know was that I had just handed her a ticking time bomb. Once the dust settled and the legal paperwork was filed, I put the final phase of my plan into motion. The house Emily had fought so hard for was valuable, yes, but it was also tied to a mortgage that I had taken out a year before the divorce, one that she had agreed to refinance during the settlement. The payments on that house were enormous, far more than Emily could handle on her own, especially with the financially disadvantaged claim she had made in court. Emily's lawyer had been so focused on getting the house as part of the settlement that they hadn't bothered to check the details of the mortgage agreement. They didn't realize that the house was more of a liability than an asset. And now, with Emily's name on the title, she was solely responsible for those payments. Within 3 months, she was drowning in debt. The alimony she had fought for barely covered her living expenses, and she couldn't keep up with the mortgage on her new trophy house. She tried to sell it, but the market had dipped, and she couldn't get a buyer to cover the full value of the mortgage. It wasn't long before she came back to me, desperate. I wasn't surprised when she reached out. Emily had always been terrible with money. When she realized I wasn't the cash cow she thought I'd be, she had nowhere else to turn. Matt, she said one day over the phone, her voice unusually soft. We need to talk about the house. I can't keep up with the payments. I had been waiting for this moment. I figured you might run into trouble, I replied coolly. What do you want to do? She hesitated. Maybe we could work something out? I know you don't want me to lose the house. It's the kids' home, too. I could almost hear the desperation in her voice. She was expecting me to swoop in and save her, to offer to buy the house back or help with the payments. But that wasn't part of the plan. I think we should sell it, I said calmly, leaning back in my chair. But if you can't handle the sale, I'd be happy to buy it back from you, for a lower price, of course. After all, the market isn't what it used to be. Emily was silent, realizing what I was offering. She had no choice. If she didn't sell, she'd lose the house to foreclosure. And if she sold it to me at the price I was offering, she'd be walking away with next to nothing. But in the end, she had to agree. The house came back to me at a fraction of its original value. The debt was cleared, and I was back in control. Emily was left with little more than the alimony payments, which I had already planned to renegotiate as soon as I could prove her financial situation had improved. She had tried to take me for everything, and in the end, she lost more than she had bargained for. As for me, I rebuilt my life, smarter, stronger, and with the kids by my side. The moment the house was back in my name, it felt like I had finally regained control over my life. Emily, so focused on winning, had fallen into the trap I had set perfectly. She thought she had stripped me of everything, but now I was the one holding the cards. She had taken the bait, and it had cost her dearly. In the weeks that followed, I kept my distance from Emily. The settlement had left her in a vulnerable position, and while I wasn't out to destroy her, I also wasn't going to help her clean up the mess she had made. She had tried to take me for everything I had worked for, and in the process, she'd lost more than just money. She had lost my trust, my respect, and now most of the assets she had fought so hard for. But as much as I wanted to celebrate my small victory, I knew the real battle wasn't over. I had gotten the house back, but there was still the issue of alimony and child custody hanging over my head. Emily had won full custody of the kids in the initial settlement, and the court had awarded her a hefty alimony. The fact that I had recovered the house was just one part of my plan. Now, I needed to focus on the bigger picture, getting my kids back and reducing the financial burden she had placed on me. The next few months were quiet. Emily was struggling, that much was clear. The stress of losing the house, combined with the pressures of raising 3 kids on her own, was starting to take its toll. I kept track of her financial situation through mutual friends and heard whispers that she was running out of options. Her once confident demeanor was starting to crack, and the life she thought she had won was slipping through her fingers. Meanwhile, I had been working with Jeff, my lawyer, to set the stage for the next part of my plan. The goal was to challenge the custody agreement and revisit the alimony payments. Jeff had warned me that it wouldn't be easy. Courts are notoriously protective of mothers when it comes to custody, but I knew that if I played my cards right, I could turn the tide in my favor. I began documenting everything. Every time I picked up the kids, I made sure to note how often they complained about not seeing me. I recorded instances where Emily was late for drop-offs or missed appointments for the kids' school activities. And I made sure to spend as much time with them as possible, building a case that I was the more reliable parent. It wasn't long before cracks started to show in Emily's ability to manage everything. She had bitten off more than she could chew, and it was becoming clear to everyone around her. I could see the exhaustion in her face whenever she dropped the kids off or when I picked them up. The once confident, manipulative woman who had tried to destroy me was slowly unraveling, and I knew it was only a matter of time before the courts would see it too. Then came the perfect opportunity. One afternoon, I got a frantic call from my eldest son, Jason. He sounded scared, his voice trembling as he told me that Emily had forgotten to pick him and his siblings up from school. The kids had been waiting outside for hours, and she hadn't shown up. I left work immediately, racing to the school to get them. By the time I arrived, the school staff had been trying to reach Emily for hours, but she hadn't answered any of their calls. I took the kids home with me, trying to keep them calm while my anger simmered beneath the surface. Emily's carelessness had put our children in danger, and I knew this was the break I had been waiting for. When I finally got a hold of her that evening, Emily was full of excuses. She had been busy, overwhelmed. She'd lost track of time, but I didn't care. This wasn't the first time something like this had happened, and I was done giving her the benefit of the doubt. I filed for an emergency custody hearing the next morning. My lawyer had prepared everything we needed, and with the evidence I'd gathered over the last few months, I knew we had a solid case. Emily had proven herself to be unreliable, and I was going to use that to my advantage. The hearing came quickly, and I walked into that courtroom with a confidence I hadn't felt in months. Emily looked frazzled, clearly stressed by everything that had been piling up on her. Her lawyer tried to argue that this was a one-time mistake, but the evidence was stacked against her. I had documented every missed appointment, every late pickup, and now, with the school incident fresh in the judge's mind, it was hard to argue that she was the better parent. The judge ruled in my favor. I was awarded joint custody, with the kids spending equal time with both of us. It wasn't full custody, but it was a major step in the right direction, and more importantly, the ruling came with a review of the alimony payments. Given Emily's new financial situation and her diminished role as the primary caregiver, the court agreed to reduce the amount I had to pay each month significantly. It felt like a massive weight had been lifted off my shoulders. Not only had I gotten more time with my kids, but I had also managed to protect my finances from further damage. Emily, on the other hand, was left scrambling. The woman who had once gloated about taking me for everything was now on the defensive, struggling to keep up with her own life. As I walked out of the courtroom that day, I felt a sense of relief I hadn't felt in months. I had fought back, and I had won. Emily had tried to take me down, but in the end, it was her own greed and carelessness that had undone her. But the best part? I didn't have to sink to her level. I didn't have to lie, cheat, or manipulate. I just played it smart, stayed patient, and waited for her to make the mistakes I knew she would. In the months that followed, life began to settle into a new rhythm. The kids were adjusting to the joint custody arrangement, and I was rebuilding my life piece by piece. The divorce had taken its toll, but I was stronger for it. I had weathered the storm, and now I was in control of my future again. Emily, on the other hand, had been left with a fraction of what she had fought so hard for. Her greed had cost her, and now she was left to deal with the consequences of her own choices. And as much as part of me wanted to feel satisfied by that, all I really cared about was that my kids were safe, and I had gotten back what mattered most. Life, after the court ruling, felt like a strange but welcome relief. The weight of the divorce, the custody battle, and the financial strain had lifted enough for me to start breathing again. The house, the reduced alimony, and shared custody were victories that I had fought hard for. But the true victory was getting my life back on track and focusing on my kids. Emily, however, was a shadow of the woman she used to be. The person who had once threatened to take me for everything was now struggling. The house had been her last major card to play, and without it, she was left floundering. She had downsized into a small rental, barely managing her finances while juggling the demands of being a mother to 3 children. The sharp, manipulative edge she used to wield with confidence was gone, replaced by stress and exhaustion. I wasn't one to kick someone when they were down, but I couldn't ignore the irony. She had fought so hard to destroy me, and now it seemed like she was the one dealing with the wreckage. Still, my focus was on the kids, and I wasn't about to get caught up in any lingering bitterness. I had gotten what mattered most: time with them, stability, and a future that wasn't tied to Emily's manipulations. But I wasn't done just yet. With the new joint custody arrangement, I started seeing the cracks in Emily's ability to handle her role as a mother. It wasn't just the stress of managing the kids, it was her complete lack of organization, her inability to follow through on basic responsibilities. The kids started coming to me with complaints. They missed school activities because she forgot. They didn't have clean clothes, and worst of all, they often felt like they were a burden on her. I documented everything, just as I'd done before. I wasn't going to rush things, but I knew that I had a chance to go for full custody if I played my cards right. I didn't want to take the kids away from their mother, but their well-being had to come first. And it was becoming clear that Emily wasn't equipped to handle things anymore. Then, one day, things escalated. I had just finished work when I got a call from my middle child, Olivia. She was in tears, barely able to get the words out. "Daddy, Mommy forgot to pick us up from soccer practice again. We've been waiting for hours and it's getting dark. Can you come get us?" My heart raced as I grabbed my keys and bolted out of the office. I was furious, but more than that, I was scared. This wasn't just a mistake anymore. This was negligence. When I arrived at the soccer field, Olivia and her younger brother Max were sitting on the curb, cold and scared. Their faces lit up when they saw me, but I could see the hurt in their eyes. I hugged them both tightly, my mind already made up. This couldn't go on. Emily had crossed a line, and I wasn't going to let her neglect our kids any longer. I brought them back to my house and tried to keep things light for their sake, but inside I was fuming. I gave Jeff a call the next morning, explaining what had happened, and he agreed. It was time to push for full custody. We had enough evidence to show that Emily was no longer capable of being the responsible parent, and the kids were clearly suffering because of it. I filed for another custody hearing, this time for full custody. The process was slow, but I was determined. Every time I dropped the kids off at Emily's place, I felt a pit in my stomach, knowing that they were being neglected, even if Emily wasn't doing it intentionally. She was overwhelmed, and I didn't blame her entirely, but that didn't change the fact that the kids needed stability. They needed a parent they could rely on. The hearing finally arrived, and this time I walked into the courtroom with more confidence. Emily looked worse than ever, tired, defeated. Her lawyer tried to argue that she was still a fit mother, but the evidence was overwhelming. I had documented months of her missing school events, forgetting pickups, and failing to provide basic care for the kids. And the incident at the soccer field was the final nail in the coffin. The judge ruled in my favor. I was granted full custody of the children, with Emily receiving visitation rights. The alimony payments were reduced even further, and now Emily had even less financial control over me. The victory was bittersweet, though. As much as I wanted to celebrate, I couldn't ignore the fact that Emily was still their mother, and I didn't want the kids to suffer emotionally from being torn between us. In the weeks that followed, The transition to full custody was smoother than I expected. The kids adapted quickly to living with me full-time, and I did everything I could to make the house feel like a safe, stable home for them. They seemed happier, more relaxed. And it wasn't long before the tension that had been hanging over our lives since the divorce began started to lift. As for Emily, she was left to pick up the pieces of her own life. The woman who had once threatened to take everything from me now had very little left. She was still entitled to visitation, but even that became sporadic. She struggled to keep things together, and eventually, she moved back in with her parents further away from the kids. The distance made it easier for them to adjust to their new life with me, and while they still saw their mother from time to time, it was clear that things had changed permanently. I wasn't proud of how things had ended for her, but I couldn't deny that I felt a sense of closure. I had done what I needed to do, for myself and for my kids. Emily had tried to destroy me, and in the end, she had destroyed herself. But through it all, I had come out stronger, more determined to protect what mattered most. One evening, after putting the kids to bed, I sat on the porch, staring out at the quiet neighborhood. The house that Emily had fought so hard for was now mine again, filled with the laughter and love of my children. The future, once so uncertain and filled with fear, now felt bright and full of possibilities. I had lost so much during the divorce, but in the end, I had gained something far more valuable: my freedom, my peace, and most importantly, my family. Looking back, everything Emily had done seemed like a desperate attempt to hold on to power, to punish me for wanting out. But now, with full custody of the kids and the alimony significantly reduced, I had most of what I needed. My life was back under my control, and my children were thriving in a stable home. But there was still a part of me that couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't quite finished yet. I had been too cautious before, too careful about making sure I did everything by the book. But Emily had shown me who she truly was, a woman willing to play dirty, to manipulate the system for her own gain. I knew if our roles were reversed, she wouldn't hesitate to pull one final move to destroy me. So why should I let her get away without feeling the consequences of everything she had done? One evening, after the kids were asleep, I sat down with Jeff to discuss the final piece of the puzzle. There was still one thing Emily had left: her remaining savings and some investments that had been awarded to her during the divorce. It wasn't much, but it was enough to live off for a while. Enough for her to recover. But I had a plan. "Are you sure about this?" Jeff asked, looking over the paperwork I had prepared. "We've already won. You've got the house, the kids, and her financial control is gone. Do you really want to push this further?" I leaned back in my chair, thinking about everything Emily had put me through. She had taken the kids from me, fought to bleed me dry, and nearly left me without a home or a future. And now she was going to walk away without real consequences? No, I wasn't about to let that happen. "This isn't about revenge," I said, though we both knew it partially was. "It's about making sure she doesn't come after me again. I need to make sure she's completely out of the picture." Jeff sighed but nodded. He had been with me from the start, seen the devastation Emily had caused, and he understood why I was doing this. We went over the plan in detail, making sure every angle was covered. The key was in the settlement agreement. Hidden in the fine print, under the financial clauses that Emily and her lawyer hadn't paid enough attention to, was a clause about her investments. They had overlooked it in their eagerness to grab the big assets like the house and alimony. But now that tiny overlooked detail would work in my favor. The clause allowed me to contest her handling of those investments, specifically if there was financial mismanagement. All I had to do was file a claim showing that Emily had been irresponsible with her funds, and thanks to her growing debt and inability to manage her finances, I had plenty of evidence to back that up. Once the claim was filed, Emily's investments would be frozen, her assets liquidated, and if the court ruled in my favor, I would get a portion of whatever was left. It wasn't just about the money, though. This move would cripple her financially, leaving her with nothing to fall back on. She'd be entirely dependent on her dwindling alimony, which was already barely enough to cover her living expenses. I knew it was a cold move, but after everything she had done, I didn't feel guilty. She had tried to take everything from me, and now I was simply ensuring she couldn't rise up and strike again. The paperwork was filed, and just like I expected, it hit Emily like a tidal wave. She hadn't seen it coming. Her arrogance had blinded her to the possibility that I could fight back one last time. When she found out her investments had been frozen and that her savings were tied up in the legal battle, she called me in a panic. "You can't do this," she screamed over the phone. "You've taken everything from me already, and now you want to destroy what little I have left." I stayed calm, letting her rage wash over me. I'm doing what I have to do, Emily. You played the game and now you're facing the consequences. You should have thought about that before you tried to take everything from me. You're a monster, she yelled, but there was fear in her voice now. She knew she had lost. I'm just protecting myself, I said evenly. The way you taught me to. The legal process dragged out for another few months, but in the end, the ruling came down in my favor. The court agreed that Emily had mismanaged her finances, and a portion of her assets was awarded to me. It wasn't a huge sum, but it was enough to leave her with next to nothing. She was left scrambling, trying to make ends meet with the little she had left Dot. And just like that, the battle was over. Emily had nothing left to take from me. No money, no control, no way to come after me again. The house was mine. The kids were with me. And I had regained control over my life in a way I never thought possible. Dot. In the months that followed, Emily faded into the background. She still had visitation rights with the kids, but those became less frequent as she struggled to rebuild her life. She moved further away, eventually getting a small job to make ends meet. The woman who had once been so determined to take everything from me had been reduced to a shadow of her former self. Dot. As for me, life became simpler, quieter. The kids were thriving in the stable environment I had worked so hard to create, and I was finally able to focus on being the father they needed. The chaos of the past few years had left its scars, but I had emerged stronger, more resilient, and with a clear sense of who I was and what I valued. One evening, as I sat on the porch watching the sunset, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The storm was over, and I had won, not just in court, but in reclaiming my life. Emily's greed and betrayal had tried to tear me down, but in the end, it had only made me stronger. I wasn't the man she had married anymore. I was better. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, I knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter, one where I was truly in control of my destiny.